This is BBC News. I'm Reeta Chakrabarti, live in Paris with a special programme on the French presidential election. Emmanuel Macron is hoping for a second five-year term in the Élysée Palace, promising to push on with reforms which have sometimes proved unpopular.
Hi, I'm Jessica Parker at Emmanuel Macron's election night location, the foot of the Eiffel Tower, where his supporters hope he'll be the first French president in 20 years to win a second term in office.
The challenger Marine Le Pen is hoping for her right-wing brand of EU scepticism and anti-immigration policies will change the course of French politics.
I'm Nick Beak at Le Pen headquarters, where her supporters hope France will elect its first female president, its first far-right president, and send a political shockwave across Europe and beyond.
Voting is coming to an end. The first exit poll could indicate who's ahead. We'll bring you all the developments from an election which could change the direction of not just France, but the whole of Europe. Welcome to Paris, where voters here and across the country are deciding on who will next lead them as president. The choice between the pro-European incumbent Emmanuel Macron and the far-right leader Marine Le Pen will determine the political priorities of France and its place in the world for the next 5 years. An exit poll due to be published in just under an hour should give a clear indication of who has won. Turnout, which is at 63% so far, is down a couple of points on the last election, an indication perhaps of the ambivalence that many voters have felt at the choice being presented to them. Well, with all the latest, here's Lucy Williamson.
The candidates say this election is about democracy, even civilization. Many voters say they're being offered a choice between cholera and the plague. Marine Le Pen's promise to slash immigration and taxes and ban the Muslim headscarf in public, or Emmanuel Macron's plan to strengthen the European Union and make the French work more. Except many people here aren't voting for a candidate, they're voting against one.
I don't vote for Marine Le Pen. I vote against Macron. And it's a problem in this country now that people, they don't want, it means they don't want Marine Le Pen and they don't want Macron. So what we do? The friends of Marine Le Pen maybe are fascist, I don't know. But now I don't want Macron.
But there are plenty here today who are voting to block Marine Le Pen. One woman told me it wasn't really a choice between cholera and the plague, but between cholera and the flu.
For me, Macron is like an opponent, political opponent, maybe, but he's not an enemy. Whereas she is really, I think, she's outside, for me, outside democracy.
If Marine Le Pen become president, it will be a shame for me to be French.
French politics used to be criticised as bland, not anymore. It's hard to imagine two more contrasting visions for the country on Europe, on NATO, on immigration, the economy, French identity. Whoever wins this election, it's unlikely to heal the divisions in France. Some say in this election it's impossible to pick a side. More than a quarter of voters are expected to abstain today.
The first round I did vote, because I was agree with some candidate that was having good ideas. But the second round I'm not having this election because it's not representing me, so that's why I'm not voting.
The stakes may be high in this election, but whether on basketball courts or in polling stations, many French people today are not so much electing a president as rejecting one. Lucy Williamson, BBC News, Paris.
Well, our correspondent Nick Beak is live at Marine Le Pen's party headquarters, and Jessica Parker is at the Macron headquarters. Nick, first of all, what are people saying to you? How are they feeling?
Good evening, Rita. Yes, well, this place is a venue that's normally home to corporate events and glitzy weddings. It's a 19th century hunting lodge that's been refurbished, and it's a top venue here in the heart of Paris. It's a world away from some of the very poor communities that Marine Le Pen has been spending so much time in over the last few weeks or so, as she's been really pushing this message that she's the only person who can deal with what she describes as France's cost of living crisis. In terms of the mood here, I can tell you already they've cracked open the champagne. Whether that's a bit premature, we'll have to wait and see. There are smiles, but if you look closer, nervous smiles as well, because people have seen here that over the last week or so, if you look at the polls, the gap between Madame Le Pen and Emmanuel Macron has grown, and he is the favourite tonight, but certainly people here are hoping they can buck the trend. Of course, it would be massive if they did. She would be France's first female president, she'd be the first far-right president, and really she'd do something that her father wasn't able to do, and something she hasn't been able to do in her two previous attempts to become president. So it would be huge, and as Lucy was saying in her report there, the ramifications for the EU, NATO and the wider world, France's place in the world would be significant.
And Nick, just talk us through a little bit about how she has changed over the last few years, because a lot has been made of how she has softened her image, eased off on traditional policies, and talked much more about ordinary, everyday bread and butter issues.
Well, this is right. She's definitely tried to change her image. The word detoxification is what a lot of people apply to this. Of course, her father ran the party that she now leads, and 20 years ago, he was trounced in the runoff, the presidential runoff. Only a fifth of the French people voted for him, and what we saw was the people coming together to keep out the far-right candidates. So what she's been trying to do is present this softer image. A lot's been made of the fact that during lockdown she was breeding cats. She paints herself as an animal lover, someone who is soft and friendly. She says she'll be a great mother of the nation. But if you look closer, certainly her detractors would point you to this, a lot of her policies haven't changed. So on immigration, very tough. There'd be a referendum there. What would actually happen? She may not talk about bringing back capital punishment, the death penalty anymore, but she still wants Muslim women to be banned from wearing a headscarf in public. And on a number of other issues, she is far right, and they are very conservative, and some of her supporters love that, of course, but the big question is, do enough French people like them? Do they see her as presidential? Do they like what she's doing? Do her policies embody the French Republic? And I think we'll get an answer to that later tonight.
And Nick, just talk to us about whether, if there is a Marine Le Pen victory tonight, and I do stress that word if, but if it does happen, just put that into some sort of context for us, because it would be a seismic shock, wouldn't it, on many levels?
It would be, Rita. I mean, at home, certainly if she brought in a lot of her domestic policy, it would change a lot of things. She's talking about cutting VAT on a lot of stuff, talking about boosting wages. Her opponents, detractors, say that it's not costed, it's not funded. It would have real implications for the French economy. She says she's the person to really look after the poor people, and says Emmanuel Macron's been a president of the rich. But in terms of France's place on the global level, well, let's look at the European Union. She doesn't say now that France should be taken out of the single currency, the euro, but basically she wants to replace the European Union, almost death by 1,000 cuts, dismantling it from within, because she says that if you look at French law, that's more important than European law. She'd want to stop payments to Brussels on a lot of things. And that's incompatible with being a member of the EU club. You simply can't do that. And when it comes to NATO, the Western military alliance, she says she wants to pull French troops out of the military command, as it's called. So basically, French troops, it would seem, wouldn't take part in any NATO operations. This, of course, is a crucial moment for Europe. There is war in Ukraine, as we know all too well. Certainly in the past, she's praised Vladimir Putin. She went to visit him in the Kremlin 5 years ago. She took a loan from a Russian bank. She says that's because the French banks wouldn't give her any cash to fund her political party. So there would be a real change here on so many different levels. Deep unease in Brussels and in Washington. And Marine Le Pen's been saying to her supporters, forget all that, it's France first. We need a fresh start. And really, if France is to be the great country that she wants it to be, she argues, they need to do something radical. They need to do something they've never done before, and they need to elect her.
Okay, Nick Beek there. Thank you very much for the time being. We'll be back to you a little bit later in the programme. Jessica Parker, who's with the Macron headquarters for the night. Macron has been ahead in the polls in the last couple of weeks. Are they confident of a victory?
It's pretty mixed, actually. So I've chatted to a few people here this evening, Emmanuel Macron supporters, and some people here as well who are just quite interested in politics. And one man I spoke to feeling pretty confident. He thought that Macron could get it over the line this evening. But actually another woman that we chatted to, pretty nervous this evening. And I think there is a slight sense of nervousness, in fact. I think that Emmanuel Macron was, of course, accused of getting off to a slow start during this campaign, but then he picked it up in recent weeks and had that live TV debate with Marine Le Pen, where he really tried to pick Marine Le Pen apart on some of those issues that Nick was just talking about. So, for example, raising Marine Le Pen's ties with Russia and that Russian bank loan, really trying to press that issue on live TV, and as well really try and pick apart some of her policies aimed at helping young people by taking them out of income tax, cutting VAT. What Emmanuel Macron's team say is that Marine Le Pen's policies may sound very appealing, but they believe they're economically illiterate. Of course, Emmanuel Macron has been something of a person who's been trying to reform the French economy, sometimes in ways that have proved somewhat unpopular, and his desire to raise the retirement age has been an issue in this campaign that he's really had to defend as well. So there are various issues the two have been tackling over the past few weeks, but in terms of the mood here this evening, some confidence, but definitely some nervousness as well.
And Jess, just a question about his style, because he's been attacked, hasn't he, for being arrogant, for being aloof, for being elitist, for being out of touch. And that will be something that he'll have had to try to combat during this campaign. And it has to be said he made a pretty late entry into the campaign.
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of accusations sometimes thrown at Emmanuel Macron's style. One of them actually is that he has a slight sense of theatre, and it's quite interesting that he's chosen this location here this evening, the foot of the Eiffel Tower. Pretty dramatic location to address his supporters later once the result is in. But yes, he's also been accused of being aloof and out of touch, and I think what Marine Le Pen did very successfully, it seemed, in the initial phase of the campaign is by talking a lot about cost of living, energy prices, fuel prices, food prices. She was seen to really be talking about an issue that mattered to voters, and she was accusing Emmanuel Macron of having essentially ignored or not helping people enough who are from lower and middle income families. So he's really had to fight back against that recently. He's talked, for example, about a price cap. He's talked about these energy checks that have been sent to many households across France to try and help them with their bills as well. But certainly there are people, and I've spoken to them, you know, we've been covering this election for obviously quite a few weeks now, and speaking to voters who do not like him personally, do not like his style, do find him aloof, do think he's a little bit elitist, don't think that he has their best interests at heart. And I think that is something that Emmanuel Macron has tried to tackle. Whether he's been successful, well, maybe we'll be able to read something into the numbers that we get later this evening when we get the result shortly. But stylistically, certainly, a lot of people do have a slight problem with the way he operates. But I think his supporters would say that he's tried to make France and take France to the centre of the world stage. He's obviously now seen as a very key EU leader, particularly following the departure of Angela Merkel, the German Chancellor, and that in terms of why he didn't get stuck into the campaign a bit sooner, they've said to me, frankly, he was pretty busy dealing with the crisis in Ukraine and trying to be one of those people leading efforts, whether it was with NATO or whether it was the European Union, to tackle Russian aggression.
OK, Jess, many thanks. Jessica Parker there at the Macron headquarters for the night. We'll have much more from her a little later in the programme. We are waiting for the exit poll, which usually gives a very accurate prediction of the result, and that will be coming out in 15 minutes' time. In the meantime, I'm joined by Alexandre Kouchner, who is a political analyst, and also Nasira Guinef, who is Professor of Sociology and Anthropology at the University of Paris 8, Vincennes Saint-Denis. Welcome to you both. what we have had out tonight is the turnout at 5 p.m. local time, which was 2 percentage points down on last time. It was 63 roughly to about 65 5 years ago. What do you read into that, Alex?
Well, I think the question they're all asking themselves in the headquarters is who did not turn out? Because according to the age group, the votes completely differ. So the real question is, who did not come? Is it the Mélenchon voters who would support Emmanuel Macron just because they hate Marine Le Pen more, or is it the other way around?
Mélenchon was the runner-up, came third of the radical left.
Absolutely. He's a radical left leader. He came up very close. He was roughly at 22, 29, 21.9. And the key voters are his voters. Who are they going to vote for? And when they were asked, they were pretty much on equal footing. 37% said they wouldn't vote. And then it was 33 who would vote for Emmanuel Macron and 29 who would vote for Marine Le Pen. You see how thin the margins are. So according to who turned out, the results will be completely different.
Nasira, if the polls are correct, and we haven't got long to wait now, but if they are correct, they've been predicting a victory for Emmanuel Macron somewhere between 6 to maybe 10 percentage points. That would still mean that Marine Le Pen probably polls 40% or so. What does that mean about France?
Well, that means that the job started by her father in 1984 has been completed, which means that however she fashions herself as someone who is smoother than her father, she is the leader of the fascist far right, just as her father was. I'm sorry to say that, but it's about fascism now. It's not just about the far right. And
Spell
she
out
has
why. Spell out
because
why you say that.
because of course it's more convenient for France now to say that there is a far right that is powerful, but let's not forget that this is rooted in the fascist trend. I mean, in the fascist experience and history of France, and her father embodied that for years and decades. He was part of the Algerian War. He was in favor of torture. He fashioned himself as someone who was a patriot, but he was in favor of the return of an authoritarian state and of this kind of rule that might be very difficult for minorities, for foreigners, and also for poor people, unlike what she says. I mean, this is how she has fashioned herself, as being on the side of the poor people, of the one that lost in the face of globalization. But let's not be carried away by the way she fashions herself. She's the far right, she's the fascist face of today's France, and she has managed to bring all the other rightists and even centrists to herself and to her views. They had to deal with that, and even Macron had to deal with that. And often sometimes he was quite successful in tipping into what she is standing for.
Okay, Alex, I mean, is that fair to call Marine Le Pen a fascist? Is that fair to say that she's in the same mould as her father was? And her father was a Holocaust denier. He had prosecutions for hate speech. She hasn't.
She hasn't, and I would disagree just in the fact that it might not be her father's doing. Ever since she took the party from her father, ousting her father, she's the one who started that trend. I think what we're seeing tonight is the apex of the strategy you just described, which is called the de-demonization strategy. Because forever, or at least since it was installed, the FN, the National Front, as it was first called, was exactly what you just described. And her father is a Holocaust denier. He has absolutely made no apologies for his wrongdoings in the Algerian War. When she ousted him, she started this journey of trying to appear more poised, to appear more normal. And in the sense, what we're seeing tonight is the results and obviously the vindication of that strategy. Is she a fascist? She certainly is an authoritarian. She certainly is a nationalist. Is she akin to Orban? Yes. Is she
in Hungary? Viktor
in
Orban.
Hungary? Very much so. Is her program still the same as last time? Very much so. But the way she fashions it has completely changed. You rightfully said she turned to bread and butter issues, not on race and immigration. The program hasn't changed a bit. Calling her a fascist probably works in her sense, because she now says that, you know, whoever thinks outside the box is easily described as a fascist. She's an authoritarian, she's a nationalist, she's an anti-EU leader. She is still in favor of the rule of law. The question is, whom does this rule of law will serve? Well, in her views, it's the French people first. It's just state-sponsored xenophobia. Yet, as we're seeing tonight, either the French don't care anymore, or she's been astute enough to sweep that under the rug so that the French people will care more about the rising cost of inflation rather than banning headcoughs in the street.
And yet the rising cost of living is an actual material issue for people here in France, in the UK, in other European countries. Why are you so sceptical that this is a genuine campaign on her part? Nasira?
No, I don't think. I think she's being strategical, but she doesn't really care about what she says. And especially when you look at the debate, I mean, she brought back all the old topics that made the fortune of the far right and of the
But she did talk about the cost of living as well.
Yeah, because she knows that she has to draw even on people that used to vote for left-wing parties, even for Mélenchon this time. She wants to appeal to them. But it doesn't mean that genuinely she is not racist, or at least she appeals to the racist vote. And she's genuinely against the presence of Islam in France. She's genuinely against the multicultural France has become as a society. And she's the face of the white French nationalism. This is how she appears to the people. And she doesn't have to say that this is who she is. She knows that people will recognize in her this old white French society and power that they long for, that they think has disappeared, has been replaced as we know it.
It's a sort of nostalgia. Can we just, because we're talking a lot about Marine Le Pen, but the polls suggest that it's Emmanuel Macron who's going to win. We don't yet know. If he does win, it'll be quite an achievement, won't it?
Quite the feat. The only president with a majority in parliament to ever be re-elected was General de Gaulle in 1965. Ever since, nobody has done so. We had two presidents who were re-elected, Jacques Chirac and François Mitterrand, but at the time of their re-election, they didn't have a majority in parliament. So they could say, it's not my government, I'll do better by myself. So it is quite the feat. And what should also be seen is that although we've discussed at length about Marine Le Pen and her strategy and how successful it has been, he has done in the polls quite well. He has added votes from his first term, which is quite the feat when you're the incumbent. And also he has managed to do something that is very interesting in terms of political debates. He's the sitting president, he has a record. And yet during the debate, he kept going back to her records, to what she voted for, to what it would actually mean for people if she were in power. So what you had was the two challengers face to face. That's really interesting. And should he be re-elected tonight, that would be quite the feat. Yet, it would not be the complete victory. Let's not forget that in 6 weeks' time, French people go back to the polls for the parliamentary elections. And this is where the tip of the power will be decided.
Okay, Alex, Nasira, stay there. Much more to discuss. And of course, when that exit poll comes out in a few minutes' time, we'll be pouring all over it. It is, of course, election night. And I want to show you some pictures from Annecy, where counting has begun. Counting of the votes has begun in the town of Annecy. The polls close at different times in France. In the big cities, it is 8 p.m. local time, but in the smaller towns, it is 7 p.m. And so that you can see that counting has started. So let's leave Annecy and go instead to our correspondent Anna Holligan, who's in northern France in an area seen as a stronghold of support for Marine Le Pen. Anna, what are people saying to you?
This is Marine Le Pen heartland here. Former mining community, used to be socialist, switched to far right. This group of Marine Le Pen supporters have just walked in clutching a cockerel. And these are the types of people who feel as though they're unheard. Their voices aren't being listened to by the mainstream politicians. And let me tell you what they've been telling me. They can't afford to put petrol in their cars anymore. They can't afford to put food on their table. They can't drive their kids to their hobbies. And they believe that Marine Le Pen has the answer. She's promised to raise the minimum wage, to cut the retirement age, and so that's where they are placing their faith tonight. They have been counting down, and one voter earlier told me the time for change is now, and if not now, then never.
Oh, hello there, Anna. You were just describing what people were saying to you. Are people quite confident?
People are confident. I want to show you around this bar because just to give you a flavour of the types of people here, because this is almost like a microcosm of French society. We've been speaking to people in here who are voting for Emmanuel Macron because they believe he deserves a second chance. He didn't get a fair run the first time round because he had to deal with COVID, he's had to deal with war in Europe, and therefore they believe he is the stable option. But there are a lot of other people who believe actually he had a chance, and they're prepared to take a leap of faith, a leap into the unknown, and that's concerning a lot of other people here who believe she is still very much extreme right. And in fact, we spoke to two friends earlier here who were enjoying a glass of wine. One of them, a retired school teacher, saying she just couldn't vote for an extreme right candidate, even though she felt as though Emmanuel Macron had failed her, had been a president of the elite, hadn't represented the concerns of the normal types of people here in Marine Le Pen's heartland. So they have their fingers crossed whether they believe she can win or not. They know, they realise, they see the figures. She's closer than she ever has been to taking power here, and so they absolutely believe now is her chance, although of course we know the polls are still against her. Minutes now to go. We're counting down. They're all gathered here, in fact, to watch the countdown.
It is not very long now. It's about 3 minutes. Anna, thank you very much. We'll be back to you soon. In the meantime, just before that exit poll comes out, I'm joined now by Danielle Obono, who is a French MP from the party La France Insoumise, which translates as rebellious or untamed France. Is that right, Danielle?
Yeah.
This is a left-wing party led by Jean-Luc Mélenchon, who gained around 20%, more than 20% of the vote in the first round of the presidential election. And the big question people have been asking is, who will your supporters vote for? What do you want to see happen?
I want Marine Le Pen defeated, of course, and that's the very one thing we said and repeated, that no vote should go to Marine Le Pen. And then we need to get together and go back on the campaign trail, because the third round of the election will happen in June for us. And after we made sure that Marine Le Pen doesn't take the country, we don't want Macron to hold the power. And so we're fighting to get a majority at the legislative election.
So I noticed that very careful formulation of words that you don't want Marine Le Pen to win, but that is not you're not saying, you did not say to people, throw in your weight behind Emmanuel Macron.
Yeah, because people won't listen to such a demand. I think there's a lot of anger against Macron, and legitimately, and the old way don't apply anymore, because we used to say that you need party leaders to tell people how they should vote on the second round, but it doesn't work anymore. We had a consultation with the people who supported Jean-Luc Mélenchon, and we had three choices, either Macron or a blank vote or abstention, and it was evenly distributed between those three choices. So anyway, I'm confident that the majority, the biggest number of people who voted for Mélenchon didn't vote for Marine Le Pen, because we campaign on issues and a program which is the antithesis of what Marine Le Pen stands for. And now we need to get together again and, keep the fight going for the next weeks.
And yet you must have had this conversation 5 years ago. I am very aware that it's less than a minute to the exit poll, but I still want an answer from you. I mean, this is the second time that the left has not been represented in the runoff.
Yeah, but it's the first time for a very long time that we get such a result. I mean, 22% of the electorate. We are the third political poll in this country, and I think we will be the future is ahead of us because of what we managed to do. It's not like 5 years ago, nobody knew what Macron-Le Pen was about, and Macron and Le Pen was about. And now we know, and I think that with the 22% that we gain, we can change a lot of things, especially next June.
Danielle, we are watching French TV where the exit poll is about to be published, and there we have it. It has Emmanuel Macron on 58.2%, Marine Le Pen on 41.8%. So that puts, who's good at maths? That puts Monsieur Macron ahead by 16 or 17 percentage points. Alex Kouchner, a comfortable victory for him.
A comfortable victory, and yet a smaller victory than last time. And we still have yet to see, in terms of absolute vote, what this gives us as a balance of power. He was elected with 66% 5 years ago. He is now at 58% with a rather high turnout. It's still 2 points underneath last time. I'm sure they're very relieved. But as Madame la députée was saying, even for Emmanuel Macron, the hard part starts now. Winning this presidential election might not have been the hardest part. As Madame la députée was calling it, the parliamentary elections are the third round. This is in 6 weeks. And Emmanuel Macron faces a tougher opposition on the left, a very tough opposition on the extreme right. The question is, can this sort of vote turn into a vote of coherence so that Emmanuel Macron gets the majority he needs should he want to implement his agenda? That's the trick part. They're rejoicing now, but wait for this evening's presidential speech and or candidate speech in which they will probably all say, rally around me, the work isn't over.
Right, very interesting. Stay there. I want to go now to Jessica Parker, who is at the headquarters of the Macron campaign. Jess, people celebrating?
Yes, certainly that result coming through just a few moments ago, projected onto the big screen here, and there was a very loud cheer, flags being waved by Emmanuel Macron's supporters. And it's worth noting, Reeta, that it is French flags and EU flags that get waved around here because, of course, Emmanuel Macron, pro-European versus Marine Le Pen, who has softened her position on the European Union, but has been historically in favour of potentially leaving the bloc, exiting the euro. Emmanuel Macron, a very different prospect, has really been seen as the heart, one of the key drivers behind the recent European project, talked more about integrating defence between countries, for example. So this projected win for him tonight will be watched very closely, not just in Paris, not just across France, but in Brussels and across the whole of the EU and beyond as well. Because particularly since the departure of Angela Merkel, Emmanuel Macron's preeminence as one of the leading figures of the EU has grown. So a victory for him tonight will be greeted by relief by many in Brussels, certainly, this evening. But of course, those in France who are Eurosceptics will be disappointed by this result.
Hello, good evening.
And Jess, we were hearing from Alex Kouchner just a little bit earlier that, okay, so it's a decisive win for Emmanuel Macron, but he has won on less of a share of the vote than he did 5 years ago.
Certainly. So, as you say, the result we've just had in 58.2% to Marine Le Pen's 41.2%, but back in 2017, he had 66.1 to her 33.9. So he certainly has a smaller margin. And what's interesting is that something Emmanuel Macron really wanted to do is to essentially see off the far right, try and champion his more centrist policies. And what Marine Le Pen has done really since she started running in presidential races since 2012 has built up support. And this is her highest polling yet in the second round of the presidential vote. So for her supporters tonight, they'll obviously be disappointed, but for the people here who will will be delighted that Emmanuel Macron has won also have to face the reality that Marine Le Pen's support and support for the far right in France has grown over the last decade. And I think that's certainly something that Emmanuel Macron, those who support his type of politics, will be looking to pay close attention to, because if he was hoping to somehow see off the far right, he absolutely hasn't.
OK, Jess, thank you very much. That's Jessica Parker, our correspondent there with the Macron campaign, with the Macron headquarters. So for viewers just joining us now, the figures have been published. An exit poll has just been published, and it predicts a win for Emmanuel Macron with over 58% of the vote. Marine Le Pen is expected to have just over 41% of the vote. So those are the figures. They are projected figures. We do talk about these being the expected margins, but it has to be said that this exit poll has never in the past been wrong about the actual result. So what we may get is a tweaking of the figures. OK, let's go live now to our correspondent Nick Beek, who is at Marine Le Pen's headquarters. And Nick, there must be disappointment there.
That's certainly the case, Reeta. I can tell you, boos rang out in this room when Emmanuel Macron's face appeared on the big screen behind me as the projected winner of this presidential race. After those boos, there was very muted applause, but I mean, the disappointment here is palpable. And just as I look around, you can see some people making their way outside, other people heading towards the bar, but you can see it on people's faces. There's a sense of disappointment, a sense of shock. I think they looked at the recent polls and realised they faced a very difficult task, but certainly those who are hoping that they might upset history and deliver an earthquake here tonight, very, very disappointed indeed. Whether or not people stay around here, drown their sorrows, do interviews, all the rest of it, not quite clear, but certainly for now, yeah, very disappointed, I think is the word here.
OK, Nick, many thanks. Thank you very much. That's our correspondent Nick Beek, who is reporting from Marine Le Pen's headquarters live in Paris, as you can see. Well, that result, again, for viewers just joining us, is that Emmanuel Macron is projected to have got just over 58% of the vote, and Marine Le Pen just over 41% of the vote. There you have it. These are projected figures, but as I was saying a little bit earlier, they have never been wrong in their prediction. The figures might change very slightly, but the actual result has never been wrong in the past. Well, I'm happy to say that I'm joined now by Bruno Golnisch, who is a French academic and member of the National Rally Party. Good evening to you.
Good evening.
Monsieur Golnisch. So, a disappointment for you tonight?
Yes, we would prefer have won, but still the result isn't so bad because, you know, I remember I was a campaign manager of her father, Jean-Marie Le Pen, in 2002. In the second round, runoff, you say? That's it? Yes. He got only 18% of the votes. Marine Le Pen last time, she got 24% of the votes. This time, 7 points more. So it's not enough to win in this type of presidential election for the time being, at least, but it's, can you say that in English, encouraging? Or
encouraging,
yes. And I think, you know, the main fundamental political fact of this election is that the two parties who led the country for the past 60 years, namely the Socialist Party and the Gaullist or Liberal Party, Republicans, okay. All together, both together, they got 6% of the votes.
Okay, and that was in the first round.
So now, yes, that was. So it's clear now that there are two main forces in French politics. On one side, those who favor globalism, and that's Mr. Macron, and those who favor defense of national identity and so on, Mrs. Le Pen. And
Mr. Golnisch, I just want to jump in here because
yes.
you will be very aware that voters have been saying this is like a choice between cholera and the plague, that Marine Le Pen still incites fear in a lot of people. This is not a good place to be.
Less and less. Well, I heard the propaganda of Mr. Kushner and so your previous guest.
Propaganda? Why?
Yes.
Why do you say that?
Oh, no, not even Mr. Mélenchon, the far left candidate, would dare to say publicly that Mrs. Le Pen is a fascist, is a racist, and so on. And nearly half of the people who voted for her. No, I think we are in the situation where of the Labour, the socialists, by the way, in the end of 19th century, beginning of 20th century in Britain. You know, there were only two main parties, Whigs and Tories, and one day the Tories would run the country, the other day the Whigs, and there were few socialists, few members of Labour elected thanks to the trade union, and one day they succeeded. And the liberal,
okay,
not yet.
Tonight you haven't succeeded.
No.
Marine Le Pen has run on a platform that is discriminatory, hasn't she?
No.
Yet she has.
No.
She has talked about preferential treatment for French people in jobs, in welfare, in housing, against people who live in France.
It's quite natural. It's quite natural that the French receive a preferential treatment in France exactly as foreigners get a preferential treatment in their own country.
So foreigners who live in France, who pay taxes, should be discriminated against? You think that is right?
Not discriminated. They will come after the French. If they disagree, they can get back to their country. There's no problem. When
you speak like that, people think that does sound discriminatory.
They're wrong. When I was in Japan, for example, I didn't enjoy the same rights than the Japanese people. It was quite normal. I was an alien. I was a foreigner. I behaved correctly. Would I have made some crime or even misdemeanors? I would have been expelled from the country.
Oh, but that is different. That is different from discriminating between law-abiding people.
No, but I didn't
who just happen not to be French nationals.
If I go to Algeria, for example, I wouldn't enjoy the same rights than the Algerians. If I go to Japan, if I go to China, if I go to the United States, as a foreigner, I would not enjoy the same rights than the
I'm sorry to jump
citizens.
In. The leader is coming onto the platform now and we're waiting for her to speak. Let's listen in.
Le sort des urnes que je respecte en a voulu autrement. En dépit de 2 semaines de méthodes déloyales, brutales et violentes, similaires à celles que subissent au quotidien les Français, les idées que nous représentons arrivent à des sommets un soir de second tour d'élection présidentielle. Avec plus de 40 voix, le résultat de ce soir représente en lui-même une éclatante victoire. Des millions de nos compatriotes ont fait le choix du camp national et du changement. J'adresse ainsi ma plus profonde gratitude à tous ceux qui m'ont fait confiance au premier tour et tous ceux qui par millions nous ont rejoints au second. Mes remerciements vont tout particulièrement à nos compatriotes des provinces et des campagnes, mais également d'outre-mer, qui m'ont largement placé en tête du second tour avec une force extraordinaire qui m'honore et me touche sincèrement. Cette France trop oubliée, nous ne l'oublions pas. Déterminés, nous le sommes plus que jamais. Et notre volonté de défendre les Français est encore renforcée. Je n'ai aujourd'hui aucun ressentiment.
As we wait for a translator, Madame Macron has said that the result represents what she called une éclatante victoire, so a resounding victory, suggesting that even though she's lost, the result, over 40% of the vote, has been a form of victory for her.
Et celui de l'aspiration largement partagée d'un grand changement. Les Français manifestent ce soir le souhait d'un contre-pouvoir fort à celui d'Emmanuel Macron. D'une opposition qui va continuer à les défendre.
Madame Le Pen is going on to say that the result tonight represents a real rebuff to the policies of Emmanuel Macron.
Face au recul promis par Emmanuel Macron de l'âge de la retraite, face à l'insécurité, à l'immigration anarchique et au laxisme judiciaire.
And she's saying that this is also a rejection of some of his domestic policies, such as raising the retirement age and the pension age.
Macron ne fera rien pour réparer les fractures qui divisent notre pays et font souffrir nos compatriotes.
And Madame Le Pen is going on by saying that Emmanuel Macron will do nothing to help repair the fractures that exist in French society.
La persévérance et l'affection que vous me connaissez. À l'issue de cette séquence présidentielle, une grande recomposition politique se fait jour dans le pays. Avec l'effacement des partis autrefois dominants et l'affirmation face aux élites autoproclamées d'Emmanuel Macron du courant national comme véritable opposition. La partie n'est pas tout à fait jouée, puisque dans quelques semaines, en effet,
opposition.
auront lieu les élections législatives.
Now, all is not lost because in a few weeks' time we have the legislative elections coming up. And with this legislative election process that reinforces the results. And at the moment, we may see Emmanuel Macron grab even more executive and legislative power. This is a very high risk. Now, no Democrat and none of our fellow citizens should accept this. This is a destructive project for France. Faced with those who want, well, in the face of those who want to try and continue the current process, we know what we will do. We will, with our sincerity intact, continue to do our work. Therefore, this evening, we would like to launch the great battle for the legislative elections. I will carry out this battle alongside Jordan Bardella and all of those who had the courage to stand up to Emmanuel Macron in the second round. I will represent all of those who are dedicated to our nation. We will now work to bring together everyone from all different parts of the country, everyone who wants to gather together and work against Emmanuel Macron. In your constituency, in the metropolitan part of France and in the overseas territories, we will continue this process. I would like to call upon you to come together and vote for these candidates. It's all left to play for at this stage. We must make sure we retain hope. The historic score of this evening shows that our party is in an excellent position to make progress in June. We want to put all of this effort to the service of our project and our ambition, and I know that you share our hopes for France. This evening, allow me to say it once again, I will never abandon French people. Long live the Republic, long live France.
Allons enfants.
Well, that is the defeated candidate, according to the projected result, Marine Le Pen, with a bullish speech saying that effectively, despite her defeat, this is a form of victory because of the proportion of the vote that she is projected to have got over 40%. She said she will never abandon the French people. And she said that Emmanuel Macron, the winner, can't repair France's fractured society. I've still got Bruno Golnisch here, member of the National Rally Party, Madame Le Pen's party. And she's saying that Emmanuel Macron can't repair France. But neither can she, can she? She's a divisive character, isn't she?
Sorry?
She is a divisive character. She says that Monsieur Macron can't repair the fractures.
She will fight. I mean, she will fight. Maybe what could be called the third round, that is legislative elections, and well, it's not the person of Mr. Macron himself, although there can be various judgments about his personality. But I think it is the fact that he's completely indebted to globalism, to free trade, to giving up French sovereignty or rights, to a European Union which in fact has very few to do with true European traditions and identities. That's the main point that we all, not only Marine Le Pen, are worrying about. But anyway, she would we have preferred to win, obviously, but still I think it's an important progress that she appears, and the National Rally appears now as the main opposition party to Mr. Macron, getting 41% of the votes, which is very important, and in progress 7 points compared to last time.
Okay, and a point that she made very clearly. I'm being told that we're about to hear from Jean-Luc Mélenchon, who was the runner-up in the first round. He's the candidate of the far left, the radical left, and he there he is about to speak now. Let's just listen in.
Barely represented a third of the registered voters. Now the result is out. Madame Le Pen has been beaten. France rejected to bestow its future upon her, and this is excellent news for the unity of our people. Now, Mr. Macron is the worst elected president of the Fifth Republic. He's survived by default. And he's now floating in an ocean of abstentions and blank votes. Now, I must think about the future victims of this situation, the people who live on benefits and work very hard, people who are extremely tired and need to retire 5 years later now, people who are in financial difficulty and won't be able to get out of it, people who know how much Mr. Macron's lack of environmental action is a crime, people who sadly look on as the country falls to ruin. To all of you, I must tell you, do not give up. On the contrary, it's time to act. En masse, democracy can once again give us a way to change the situation. The third round begins tonight. On the 12th and the 19th of June, we will have the legislative elections. You can beat Mr. Macron and choose another path. On the 12th and 19th of June, another world is still possible if you elect a majority of representatives of the new popular union, which must grow now. The popular bloc, which was formed around my candidacy for the presidential elections, is now the third option that can change everything if we unite our efforts and if we broaden them. On the 12th and 19th of June, I call upon you to elect me as the Prime Minister, and this will bring a new future to our people. Be brave, take action, be determined, and do not give up. Long live France, long live the Republic.
Merci.
So that was Jean-Luc Mélenchon, the leader of the radical left party. He was effectively the runner-up in the first round, which took place 2 weeks ago. I want to take you live now to Marine Le Pen's party headquarters in Paris, and our correspondent Nick Beek is there. Nick, she gave a rousing speech to her supporters, saying that effectively what they've done is clutched victory from the jaws of defeat. And I suppose she's referring there to the fact that the projected figures for her party, for her, are over 40%. That's adding 7 percentage points to what she got 5 years ago.
Yeah, that's right, Reeta. The atmosphere here was picked up somewhat. Some cheers during that speech as Marine Le Pen took to the stage behind me. I think there was initial shock and disappointment in the minutes after the projection was made, and Emmanuel Macron's face, not Marine Le Pen's face, was put on the big screen here in front of us. And yes, there were applause as she said that the fight's not over and that she would remain a counterforce to Emmanuel Macron. As well as the cheers, there was more booing though. You could hear it very loud in the room here when she talked about a dirty tricks campaign having been fought by the Macron campaign, and also every time Macron's name was mentioned, there were jeers and boos here. But in terms of thanking people, she said that the support of the French people, particularly in the countryside, as well as overseas, has been something that has really powered this movement on. And she looked ahead to the elections coming up for not presidential elections, but more elections to come here that we've been talking about, saying the fight's not over and that this is an historic achievement. So even though she's lost, certainly she was trying to portray it as a victory of sorts, although of course she has conceded defeat to Emmanuel Macron tonight.
Yes, indeed, Nick. And when you say that she was claiming that the Macron camp had fought a dirty campaign, what was she referring to?
Well, I think a number of things really, in terms of the TV debate, which we know is pretty important in this, in which she did better than 5 years ago, but certainly people thought that she didn't do enough to really sway those voters who needed to join her campaign if she were to become the president. I mean, could it be the way that Macron dealt with her during that debate? Her supporters were saying that he was aloof, he was condescending, he interrupted her, he didn't give her the respect that she deserved as one of the two final candidates in this runoff. In terms of what else she means, she might talk about that in the coming days and weeks. But certainly the campaign here, where they go from now, this is the third attempt she's had to become French president. Everyone knew that this was the closest she was going to get, but in terms of translating the support that she finds when she goes to the heartland, she goes to the communities where she's welcomed with open arms. They weren't able to do that, and you'd imagine in the days and weeks to come they'll be looking at what it was that voters didn't like, and we know it actually wasn't that close in the end. Some people talking about the Brexit effect or the Trump effect, that it actually could be paper thin, the margin between the two candidates. Is it the fact that if you look at her policies, despite the new image she's tried to cultivate over the last few years, the softer image, a lot of the policies that remain are quite tough domestically. We know that the proposed ban on Muslim women wearing a headscarf in public alienated a lot of people. And also, I think, you know, the timing of this. She has been historically close to Vladimir Putin. She's praised the Russian leader, went to visit him 5 years ago, and although during the first round of voting here she was quite good at distancing herself from him, and she actually condemned Russia's actions in invading Ukraine. Was that a concern for people? Did they look at her and think, this is not someone who can represent our country on the world stage? Were there just too many doubts that the French people had, despite this disdain that some people have been talking about for Emmanuel Macron? Despite that, the unpopularity, the fact that the economy was on the rise, unemployment had been falling, more French people decided that it was worth giving him another shot, another 5 years, Rita.
And Nick, just listening to Marine Le Pen a little bit earlier, she said, I will never abandon the French people. So no suggestion that a third defeat, as you've put it, no suggestion that a third defeat means that she's off.
Well, that's it, and I mean, she is the face of the party. She's one of these politicians who goes by just one word, Marine. She's one of these politicians who needs no surname to be attached to her. She is the heart and soul, her supporters would say, of her campaign. Of course, she inherited the reins of the party from her father, and the whole project was trying to distance herself from him and some of his other top party figures who, down the years, many French people decided were either racist or certainly not the statesmen to be representing France on the world stage. So, you know, it's hard to tell in terms of any other members of the party who may come forward, but certainly she said tonight that she's not going anywhere, that this is something that should be built upon in elections to come. But, you know, is it time for a change within her party? We shall see. This is her third attempt at the presidency. It was third time unlucky for her, and despite what she said tonight, the brave face she was putting on this, the way she led her supporters in a rendition of La Marseillaise, the French national anthem, I have to tell you, it did sound flat compared to 2 weeks ago when I was in Le Pen HQ. It sounded flat, and it's a bit like the champagne here, which is going flat because they poured out a load of the stuff, and I can tell you, the people who are drinking it, they haven't got beaming smiles on their face, Rita. They're sort of drowning their sorrows and coming to terms with this defeat.
Very interesting. Thank you so much. Nick Beek, our correspondent there with the Marine Le Pen camp. Well, just to recap, Marine Le Pen has conceded defeat in the French presidential election. It comes after exit polls predicted a win for Emmanuel Macron with over 58% of the vote, and Le Pen is expected to have just under 42%. Well, with me again are Alex Kouchner, political analyst, and Nasira Ghanef, who is professor at Paris 8 University. We were just speaking a little bit earlier, Alex, about, because we've just had the exit poll figures there. And you had some interesting detail about how many votes we think Marine Le Pen has gained on last time.
Well, it seems, these are estimates, right? We will have the results as they come in, but it seems she added 3 million votes to her name. That is why, in her sense, she can say this is a big victory. First of all, in 2017, she was written off. Her dismal performance at the debate had put her somewhere in the limbo of politics. She is back. She added 3 million to her name. It seems now that a lot of French people, at least 41% of the voters, think that this is a legitimate party. And this is a huge feat. We were discussing earlier of where that party comes from. This is a party founded by Holocaust deniers and former SS members. And to be able to shed that image off is to her credit. That has always been her strategy. And yes, it's her third time running. It didn't work this time. She keeps on adding votes. She keeps on restructuring her party. would bet that you can count on her for the next presidential elections.
So she's not off, is she? So when she says, I will never abandon the French people, that's what that means?
Well, yeah, that's her business. It's the family business. Her name is the brand. So by continuously campaigning, she will still be there. It's harder for her during non-presidential years because being a member of parliament doesn't really cast such a shining light. But what we're seeing here is a complete recomposition of the political landscape in which she is now the right-wing opposition to Emmanuel Macron. This gives her certainly another go, or at least an incredible political weight, at least in the 6 weeks to come.
6 weeks to come where there are parliamentary elections. Nasira, we heard a few minutes ago from Jean-Luc Mélenchon, who came third in the first round 2 weeks ago. He only came in a little bit behind Marine Le Pen, but it is the case that the left in this presidential election, in the election 5 years ago, were not present. What happens to the left in France now?
Well, I think that Mélenchon embodies what happened to the left in France. It means that now he is embodying the left, unlike 5 years ago, during which one could seem to understand that the Socialist Party might still be alive. It has died since then. It has been completely crushed by Emmanuel Macron at the end of the 2017 elections. And now what we see is a shift towards Mélenchon that not only has the votes of people who are in favor of his program, but also he gained the votes of those who were likely to vote for the Green or for the Socialist Party that has completely disappeared from the picture. But let me add something about the so-called victory of Emmanuel Macron, if I may. I think it's interesting to consider the fact that, you know, the partisanship and the party that he built are very keen to claim that as a victory. And one should be cautious about that because the next turn, and especially the election that is forthcoming, is not about a victory. People that voted for Macron voted against Marine Le Pen, which is quite different from voting for him and for his program. And they seem to forget that very quickly. They did that the first time because it was exactly the same scheme that we were in. But this time he has been president for 5 years. He has drawn a lot of anxiety, a lot of also hatred from a lot of French people. So it would be maybe interesting to see if they are humbled by the figure or if they consider that this is their time again to push forward their program, whereas it's not for the program of Macron that people voted mainly.
Interesting. In fact, if I may, yes, you could tell that today some of the French people voted just for whom they hate the least. As you rightfully said, this is not 58% of the French voters who actually are in favor of his policies, which makes his next term quite difficult to handle because this would mean that the moment you step onto that new stage as the renewed president, you still already have a very strong opposition. If you look at the first round, which is much more telling, well, you have almost 2/3 of the voters who are already against your program. This is going to be very tricky for Emmanuel Macron for his legacy term because he cannot run after this term.
So he's got to do whatever he wants to do now.
Yes, and it's very likely that he will not get the kind of majority that he got for his first term. It's all the fight that is starting now. It's about making sure that he can.
The parliamentary elections.
Yes,
this is in the Assemblée.
Exactly. And so it's all about making sure for a lot of people who gave him his vote, their vote, but do not comply or do not approve of his program, to make sure that this translates into the new parliamentary assembly and that he does not have all the ease that he had in 2017 in order to implement his program. This is going to be another fight, and those people that seem to be acting as a victory or victorious should be cautious not to make people think that this is over.
Okay, Nasira, Alex, for the moment, thank you both very much indeed. Back to you shortly. Here, let's take a look at some essential facts about Emmanuel Macron. He's 44 years old and has served as president of France since 2017. If he wins today, he'll then be constitutionally barred from running again. He has a background in banking and served as a senior advisor to President François Hollande in his socialist administration. He launched his own party, En Marche, and became France's youngest ever president, aged 39, in 2017. In policy terms, he's committed to France playing a key role in the European Union, although he has called for reforms to the organisation. He's introduced reforms to labour laws, taxation and pensions, which have triggered some protests, including the Yellow Jacket demonstrations, which started in 2018 after fuel taxes were increased. And on the international stage, he was highly critical of a security deal which saw Australia renege on an agreement to buy French submarines, going to the US and the UK instead. And he spoke repeatedly to Vladimir Putin about Russia's invasion of Ukraine. I want to take you now. The pictures that you're seeing are live in Paris at the foot of the Eiffel Tower, an area called the Champ de Mars, where Macron supporters are celebrating their leader's victory tonight. It remains a projected victory, I must say, because this is the exit polls you can see on the screen, which puts Emmanuel Macron at 58.2% of the vote. Marine Le Pen has come in at 41.8%. These are predicted figures, but as I've said before, the overall result has never in the past, according to an exit poll, been wrong. So it would be quite something if it were wrong this time. Anyway, everybody there clearly extremely happy, and that is the party to be at tonight in Paris. Well, I'm pleased to say that I'm joined now by Michel Verviers, who is a French sociologist. Hello to you. Thank you so much for joining us on BBC News. What's your reaction to the result?
Well, it's a strange mixture, like for many French people, because on the one hand, I consider that it's a shame to have such a huge score for somebody coming from the extreme right. It's a shame. On the other hand, I'm not totally convinced about what Macron is going to do, because I know what he has done during the last 5 years, and what he promised recently is not exactly what he has been doing during the last 5 years. So I am like many French people that voted for him without any energy, without any enthusiasm, and I don't think that there will be a lot of enthusiasm, and that we are just at this moment when we are entering a new era. That's my first feeling. My second feeling is that this election is maybe the proof that we must change a lot in the institutional French system. This system was built by General de Gaulle, a big man. We are in front of the Arc de Triomphe, you know, France like that, a great man, and in a time where politics were very different. And now the result is that we have nobody at the second turn, nobody from the left, a man who is between center and right, the new president or the renewed president, and the extreme right. So this is not possible. We have three political forces in this country that cannot discuss together. We are not in Germany where political actors find solutions to work together. So my feeling is that we need very strong institutional changes, because if we don't have these changes, we shall have many, many big problems.
But is that at all likely?
Well, difficult to answer.
Because it's not in the interests of the person who's won, is it? Why would he want to change anything?
Well, I will give you some more precise examples. Maybe it's not the very best moment tonight where people are just happy and so on, are celebrating, and we must respect this. But during the last 5 years, we have seen in this country a certain number of intermediary bodies being decomposed, being destructive. I give you just a key example. We had some trade unions in this country. The President Macron did not want to discuss really with them, including the ones that wanted to make reforms, not the radical ones. So trade unions today are not very useful. And I could say the same with big NGOs and associations. And I could say the same with many institutions, which means that between the political power and the people, we are losing mediations, intermediary institutions, parties, and so on. So if we don't have a new building, a rebuilding of all this system, the situation could become very dangerous. So this is a key issue, and I am not sure that the new president will really do a lot for
you must have felt depressed hearing so many people saying they're choosing between the lesser of two evils.
Well, I tried not to think like that. It's not between two evils, because I can also say that without Macron, maybe it would have been worse. We are not in Hungary. We are not in Russia. We are in a country where the democracy is still alive, where the state of right is okay, and so on.
I just want to get you to pause there and go over to Eric Zemmour, who got 7% of the vote in the first round. Eric Zemmour of the far right. Let's listen in.
Lose at every election, even though a majority of our people want France to remain France. No, what I want to say this evening is that all is not lost. We do have reasons to hope. Our party, Reconquest, has been strengthened by this beautiful activist youth. Our party, Reconquest, has been strengthened by its 122,000 members, and I call upon more people to join our party by the day. And we have strength in the thousands of staff that we have in France and the talent that we have within our party. Now, we are able to fight against the deconstruction of our country that Emmanuel Macron is carrying out. We will continue to fight for our ideas in every city and village of France, as well as on the internet and through the media. However, there cannot be an electoral victory without an alliance between all of the right-wing parties, between grandparents and their grandchildren, between urban and rural areas, between all people that want to continue living in a France that is still French. The political situation today requires us to act. The legislative elections, which are coming up in June, are bringing about the formation of two political blocs around Emmanuel Macron and Jean-Luc Mélenchon. So we've got the Islamo-leftist and the Mélenchon camp. We've got these two blocs uniting to carry out this, to play in this match, which only has one loser, France. Therefore, the national camp is the only camp that has not been able to unite its forces. Are we really going to give all the power to Emmanuel Macron and Mélenchon? I do not want that to happen. Millions of us do not want this to happen. The national bloc must also unite. We have an enormous responsibility. For that reason, I call for national union for the legislative elections. We must forget our quarrels. We must all unite. This is absolutely essential, and it's our duty. Let's build, as fast as we can, the first right-wing patriotic coalition, bringing together National Rally, Reconquest, Debout la France, and the Republicans that do not want to join Emmanuel Macron. This is an opportunity to really have some clout and perhaps even win out of the legislative elections. Our coalition is not just an option, it's in fact a necessity. It's our duty. We have a country to reconquer. Our strength is in our union. Our coalition must be strong. Long live the Republic, and most of all, long live France.
Well, that was Eric Zemmour calling for a right-wing patriotic coalition with the National Rally, the party of Marine Le Pen. Eric Zemmour, who got 7% in the first round, and he told his voters to support Marine Le Pen. Well, let's just remind you of what we know. The exit poll, which has been published about sort of 50 minutes ago, and it predicts a win for Emmanuel Macron with over 58% of the vote, and Marine Le Pen is expected to have just under 42%. And as I say, those figures are projected figures. They may vary a little bit, but the overall result has never been wrong, so it would be quite something if it were wrong this time. Certainly, Marine Le Pen has conceded this election. Well, speaking shortly after the exit polls from her campaign headquarters, Marine Le Pen did concede defeat to the incumbent in the election, but she also said that she would keep up the political fight against President Emmanuel Macron in the run-up to the June parliamentary elections.
At the end of this process, there is an enormous process happening in this country, and there are efforts to combat the elites represented by Macron. Now we have a genuine opposition. Now, all is not lost, because in a few weeks' time we have the legislative elections coming up. And with this legislative election process that reinforces the results. And at the moment, we may see Emmanuel Macron grab even more executive and legislative power. This is a very high risk. Now, no Democrat and none of our fellow citizens should accept this. This is a destructive project for France. Faced with those who want, well, in the face of those who want to try and continue the current process, we know what we will do. We will, with our sincerity intact, continue to do our work. Therefore, this evening, we would like to launch the great battle for the legislative elections. I will carry out this battle alongside Jordan Bardella and all of those who had the courage to stand up to Emmanuel Macron in the second round. I will represent all of those who are dedicated to our nation. We will now work to bring together everyone from all different parts of the country, everyone who wants to gather together and work against Emmanuel Macron in your constituency, in the metropolitan part of France and in the overseas territories. We will continue this process. I would like to call upon you to come together and vote for these candidates. It's all left to play for at this stage. We must make sure we retain hope. The historic score of this evening shows that our party is in an excellent position to make progress in June. We want to put all of this effort to the service of our project and our ambition, and I know that you share our hopes for France. This evening, allow me to say it once again, I will never abandon French people. Long live the Republic, long live France.
Marine Le Pen there, speaking a little bit earlier during her concession speech, conceding that she has been defeated in the election. Well, I'm joined now by Hervé Berville, who is a French MP from Emmanuel Macron's La République En Marche party. Congratulations to you and your leader. Clearly a cause for celebration for you tonight. But the gap between Emmanuel Macron and Marine Le Pen this time is closer. It's smaller than it was 5 years ago. That must be a cause for concern.
Yes, of course, like the abstention also, and that's why we need to work harder than the last 5 years. But tonight I'm relieved and happy. Happy because French people, French citizens chose hope against fear. They chose unity against division. And now we have to work and making sure that the project that French people put first in the first round and put first also here in the second round, this project of unity, of building a strong Europe, on making sure that we tackle this issue of climate change, we make sure that we face this challenge of social justice, that we're going to deliver it, and we need a clear also mandate at the National Assembly, and we're going to continue doing this.
And yet so many people said during the campaign that they didn't feel that Emmanuel Macron addressed these concerns, particularly on social justice.
I mean, they felt that politics was not changing their life. And we heard this message. That's why, but that's not like a message particularly in France. We can see it in a lot of different European countries and Western countries, but we need to tackle this issue of making sure people are part of the democratic process. They feel heard, they feel listened. That's why we're going to continue. I think we've done a lot of things over the last 5 years. There are a lot of challenges ahead of us, and we're going to continue and making sure that also we change the way that we govern, change the way that we implement policy. And that's the fight that we need to take.
While you're speaking, Hervé, we're showing pictures of President Macron travelling down perhaps towards the area where we think he's going to be giving his speech, his victory speech, down towards the Eiffel Tower and towards the Champ de Mars. While we look at those pictures, Hervé, I mean, I hear what you say, but there's a lot of work to be done then for President Macron. He's got a second term, but he's only got this term. What are his priorities, do you think?
The first priority is making sure that we tackle this issue of the rising cost of living. The second is facing this issue of climate change and listen to young people marching, asking us much more on this issue. The third one is health, making sure that all across France you can have access to a good health situation. And the last one, which for me is really important, how we can also change our institution to make sure that that people felt more like included in the democratic process. But you know, like, we've done a lot of job. Over the last 5 years, we transformed with all the European leaders Europe. We made stuff that we thought were impossible. We also reduced the unemployment. And we are now a historic low level of unemployment. So we had some success. We have still have a lot of challenges, and we're going to continue making sure that we take people from the left, from the right, from ecological party, from the center, because this is what we believe. In those difficult challenges, we need to unite people and making sure that we tackle the right and the issue facing our citizens.
You've got another challenge in 6 weeks' time, which is elections to the Assembly, to the French Parliament. And some people say that the party, La République En Marche, could do pretty badly in those elections. I mean, you could end up in a situation where you have paralysis, couldn't you?
I mean, everything is possible, but the same people were saying that it was not possible that President Macron was elected in 2017. They were saying that it was not possible that we could have like a majority in 2017. It was the same for this year. So we have to have a lot of humility, listen to people, do the campaign, because we need to show people that we want this clear mandate to govern, that we want a strong majority to face all the challenges that we described. And I'm sure people will listen to us and will make sure that President Macron has the way and the power to deliver what he promised in this election.
Okay, we'll leave it there. Thank you very much indeed. Hervé Berville from President Macron's party. Thank you very much. I want to show you those pictures that I brought you just a few minutes ago of a motorcade going through Paris. That is accompanying President Macron on his way to the headquarters, the makeshift headquarters, which are at the foot of the Eiffel Tower at the Champ de Mars. And there, in fact, it is. supporters celebrating, of course, music, flags, everything that you'd expect. There must be much happiness and relief there at the result that we've had. There you have it up on the big screen, the projected result for President Macron, for Emmanuel Macron, I should say, 58.2% against Marine Le Pen, who has got just over 41% of the vote. It is a projected vote. It is a projected result, I should say, because it's based on an exit poll. We will get the actual result at some stage in the next few hours. But it is the case that the exit poll has never, in any French election, produced the wrong result. It may be tweaked a little bit, but it has never, in fact, produced the wrong result. So it is a victory for essentially the continuity candidate, Emmanuel Macron, and he has achieved a second term in office, the first to do so in 20 years. The last was Jacques Chirac in 2002. So it has been the continuity candidate over Marine Le Pen and her appeal to the French to vote, as she said, French.